continue lesson 19. We're on question number 5. Remember, the 4 steps to division are: number 1, see how many times it'll go. And with a polynomial being divided by a monomial, then what we're really doing is saying first piece and first piece, right? How many times will first piece go into first piece? And then you, I forgot to say that on the air, then you multiply, and then you subtract, which means you change your sign, and then you bring down, right? So we see how many times it'll go, multiply, subtract, bring down. When you see how many times it'll go, you're thinking first piece with first piece. When you multiply, you remember to distribute. When you subtract, you're changing the signs, and then you bring down. Okay, so how many times will x go into 6x cubed? 6x squared. So see how many times it'll go. And then we multiply, and we would remember that times a sum, you put the sum in parentheses and distribute. So we're applying the distributive property when you multiply. So 6x squared times x is 6x cubed, and 6x squared times 7 is 42x squared. So we see how many times it'll go, 6x. And then we multiply, remembering to distribute, and then we subtract, which means change the sign and add. Those cancel, and you're going to get a negative 1 understood x squared. So that's one revolution, almost. And then you bring down. That was one revolution. Now we start again. How many times will this go into this? And we look at first with first. So how many times will x go into negative x squared? Negative 1 understood x. And we're going to distribute that, right, when we multiply. And so we're going to get negative x times x is negative x squared. Negative x times 7 is negative 7x. See how many times it'll go. Multiply, remember to distribute. Now you subtract by changing the sign and adding. Those cancel. And so we're going to get, when you add or subtract with different signs, subtract and take the larger sign, negative 15x. And then you bring down. And then you start again. How many times will, and don't forget we look at first with first. How many times will x go into negative 15x? Negative 15. And then we multiply, not forgetting to distribute. Negative 15 times x is negative 15x. Negative 15 times 7 is negative 105. Then we subtract in the way of changing the sign and adding. Those cancel, and we get 5. So what do we put at the end? Plus remainder 5 over divisor x plus 7. The divisor is the factor that you're dividing by, right? The divisor is that factor that you're dividing by. So we get 6x squared minus x minus 15 plus 5 over x plus 7. And I'm going to move that just a hair there. All right. Any questions on number 5? This is long division of a polynomial by a binomial. Okay? All right. Number 6. Let me give myself some space here with my whiteout. Now, the first step is to see how many times it'll go, and we look at first part here with first part here. So how many times will 2x go into 2x cubed? X squared times. And then we multiply in the way of distributive. Good. So x squared times 2x is 2x cubed. And then x squared times negative 1, negative x squared. See how many times it'll go. Then you multiply. Then you, in the way of changing the signs and adding, those cancel, and we get 20x squared. And then you bring down. Then we start again. See how many times it'll go. We look at first here with first here. How many times will 2x go into 2x squared? 10x times, so plus 10x. And then we multiply in the way of distributive. 10x times 2x is 20x squared. 10x times negative 1, negative 10x. That's a negative. Chopped off my minus. Whoop. Now we subtract in the way of changing the sign. Those cancel. When you add or subtract with different signs, you subtract and take the larger, negative 21x. And then you bring down. And then you see how many times it'll go. How many times will 2x go into 21x? 10 times, minus 10 times, right? Negative 10. Then we're going to distribute. 10 times 2x is 20x. 10 times negative 10 times negative 1 is positive 10. Negative 20, thank you. Negative 10 times 2x is negative 10x. And then we're going to subtract in the way of changing the signs and adding. Those cancel, and we get, those don't cancel. I was going to not do that. Whoops. Those do not cancel. We get negative x. Minus 31. What do we do with that? We say plus negative x minus, uh-oh. I'm going to have to write it over here. I ran out of writing space. So we got x squared plus 10x minus 10 plus my remainder of negative x minus 31 over 2x minus 1. Or you could say x squared plus 10x minus 10, and we could factor out that minus and say minus x plus 31 over 2x minus 1. If you wanted to factor that common negative out of the numerator. Okay? Any questions on number 6? That's long division method of multiplying a polynomial by a binomial. Normally we do it of the first degree to reduce from a cubic to a quadratic, or from a quartic to a cubic to a quadratic, as we'll learn later. Any questions so far? On the back side, we're really doing the same thing. We're just doing it with a different method. Now, this is important. X plus 7 is called the factor. What is the root if that's the factor? Negative 7. The root is what happens if you set the factor equal to 0 and solve, right? So if you have the factor and you want the root, you set the factor equal to 0 and solve for the root. In synthetic division, we're going to take the coefficients only. But we can't skip. This is x to the what power? X to the second, x to the first, x to the 0, because the 0 powers the ones. If there was any of those missing, you'd have to put a 0 in its place. Okay? You can't leave a gap. You'd have to put a 0 as a placeholder when you divide. Okay? So here's how we're going to do it with synthetic division. We're just going to write down those coefficients. 6, 41, negative 22, negative 100, divided by the root, not the factor. The root is negative 7 when the factor is x plus 7. We divide by the root. Okay? Now, the steps are bring down, multiply, bring down, add, whoops, multiply, add, etc. So you're going to bring down, multiply, add, multiply, add, multiply, add, multiply, add, multiply, add, till you get to the end. Okay? What's going to happen when you divide an x to the third something by an x to the first something, you're going to end up with an x square something, right? So we're going to go from a cubic to a quadratic. All right, so step 1 is to bring down. Step 1, I said step 2. That was weird. Step 1 is to bring down. Step 2 is to multiply. Negative 7 times 6 is negative 42. Step 3 is to add negative 1. And then we repeat that. We multiply. Negative 7 times negative 1 is positive 7. We add. I'm just adding. We left it negative. We're not changing any signs. The question was, did we change the sign of the 42? The answer is no. Because we're going to multiply and then add. And to add, we don't change the sign. We just use sign rules. And then we're going to multiply. Negative 7 times negative 1 is positive 7. And then we're going to add negative 22 plus 7 is negative 15. And then we're going to multiply. Negative 7 times negative 15 is 105. And then we add, and we get a positive 5. Okay, everybody see how we got that? Any questions on that part? Now, what's happening? We're going from a x to the third to a x to the second. So what's connected to the 6? X squared. We're reducing from x to the third stuff to x to the second stuff. And then it just goes down from there. Minus x to the first. Minus just a number with no x on it. And then what's that? It's the remainder. What do we put our remainder over? The factor. See, we divide by the root, but don't forget the factor really is x plus 7, and you put your remainder 5 over the divisor, x plus 7, the factor, not the root. Any questions on number 7? Good. Okay. Number 8. So, number 8, we've got a 2. That's to the third. 19 is to the second. We're making sure we didn't skip. X to the first. Then the number, negative 21, which is an x to the 0, divided by the root, which would be a negative 3. The factor is x plus 3, so the root would be negative 3. What's step 1? Bring down. Step 2, multiply. Negative 3 times 2 is negative 6. That pops right back up there. Step 3 is to add. We didn't change the sign. It's plus a negative 6, and we get a 13, right? And then we multiply. Negative 3 times 13 is negative 39. And then we add negative 70. You don't change the sign when you add, right? Now we're going to multiply. Negative 3 times 70 is 210. And then we add. You get 189. We're going from an x cube to an x squared. So the 2 is a 2x squared. And then the exponent drops from there. So plus 13x minus 70 plus my remainder, which goes over the divisor. And for the divisor, we use the factor instead of the root. Any questions on number 8? No. You don't have to put the R. I was just verbalizing. We'd prefer not to have it, actually. Anyway, any questions on number 8? Now, number 9, we're using synthetic division and the remainder theorem to indicate the function value. Okay? So we want to find f negative 7. First of all, let's find f negative 7 the old-fashioned way. If we were going to find f negative 7 the old-fashioned way, we would stick a negative 7 in place of x everywhere there is one. And so we would say f negative 7 is equal to 2 times negative 7 cubed plus 19 times negative 7 squared minus 31 times negative 7 minus 16. Now somebody punch out in the calculator and hit enter. 2 times negative 7 cubed plus 19 times negative 7 squared minus 3 times negative 7 minus 16. We want to find the old-fashioned way, the function value. Now, you don't have to do that on a test. We just want to validate this rule since it's our first look at it. .446. Now, according to synthetic division and the remainder theorem, if we do synthetic division using this as our root, then the remainder, when we divide, should be 446. The remainder is the function value at that given root, okay? So if we took 2, 19, negative 31, negative 16, divided by, that's a negative 7, which means that the factor would actually be an x plus 7, right? Then the remainder, when we do that, should come out to be 446. So let's see. We're going to bring down, multiply, add, multiply, add, multiply, thank you, multiply, you get 462, add, so we would have 2x squared plus 5x minus 66 plus 466 over x plus 7. Notice that the remainder is the function value at that root. Okay? Now, we want to talk about that before we leave it. So I'm going to let you write it down, and then I need you to think with me for just a second. So don't turn things off yet. What does that mean? If we were trying to graph something, and we were doing synthetic division for a reason you may not totally understand right now, remember back when we were talking about bouncing and crossing and we were finding all the roots? And there were times I had to give you all the roots because you didn't know how to do it yet. Well, now you know how to do it. So we're going to be using this to find all the roots, and we'll talk about whether they cross or bounce and in behavior and all that good stuff. But what would happen if you did synthetic division and you just did this right here and you got this? Is that any good to us graphically? Yes. When x is negative 7, y is 446. Now that's an extra point we could graph, right? So when you do synthetic division and you get that, don't chunk it. It may not be a 0, but it's a point on the graph, you see. You'll see why I'm telling you that later. But we did create an ordered pair, okay? So that is the function value at x is negative 7, which is an ordered pair. Any questions on lesson 19? Okay, appreciate your